Hello, I am Professor Sayari. I want to say about leadership and anti-monarchy thoughts in the book of Judges. The period of Judges was about 200 years from 1200 BC, when the Israelites entered the land of Canaan, to the advent of monarchy. To describe this era in one word, because there was no king. Everyone did what they thought was right. The emphasis on the absence of a king serves as a bridge with the books of Samuel, which deal with the rise of David, the greatest king of the history of Israel. In this way, Judges can be seen as dealing with the absence of leadership within the days of Joshua, the greatest servant of Yahweh, and the days of greatest King David, which paradoxically shows the hope for leadership restoration. The judges chosen in this age were charismatic leaders who were built with God-given power, and the characteristic of these judges was that their offices could not be inherited by lineage. The office of judge was to end in his time. However, the expression "because there was no king" paradoxically implies that the earth of judges was someone who has already experienced monarchy. Moreover, in the period of judges, some theophoric names appeared, such as Abimelech and Elimelech, alluding to the imminent beginning of a monarchy. So, what is the author's view of the monarchy experienced and impending monarchy? Although all times in history are times of crisis, the age of judges in the Old Testament shows a series of crises, especially so-called the Dark Ages. The crisis appears in repeated historical patterns of transgression, punishment, repentance, salvation. After the leader's death, the people left Yahweh and worshipped other gods. Yahweh was angry and punished Israel by sending other nations to oppress them. Then Israel appealed to Yahweh in agony, and Yahweh raised up judges to save Israel. But soon Israel was again drawn to worship of other gods, and the same history began anew. Judges were the chosen leaders of their time, and their appearance of God's grace towards the people of Israel. However, not all chosen leaders exercise the right leadership. In times of crisis, the role of leaders is more important. The book of Judges contains the stories of God's chosen leaders and war heroes. A role of war heroes is more important. The book of Judges contains their stories again and again. What is the leadership of leaders according to the author of Judges? What kind of monarchy did or she or they experience? While reinterpreting the narratives of Gideon and Jephthah, this study intends to examine in what sense the author or editor of the book of Judges defines the period of Judges as an era without a king, the characteristics of leadership, and their search on the monarchy. The greatest war in the book of Judges is the war against the Bedouins. They used camels to attack Israel through the valley of Israel during the harvest season. The tribe that suffered the most from this was the Manasseh, and the Gideon the Manasseh was afraid of their attack. While Gideon was threshing wheat in an invisible wine press, not on a threshing floor, an angel of the Lord visited him. When Gideon learned that the one who had come to him was an angel of God, he was overcome with fear. It was because he thought that if he met God or an angel of God, he would die. In his meeting with the messenger of God, he asked for a sign to confirm that he had been called. His appearance, engulfed with fear and hesitation, is reminiscent of Moses, the leader of the Exodus. God reassured and comforted Gideon, who was trembling in fear, and Gideon built an altar there to the Lord and called it Yahweh Shalom. The meaning of this altar, which Gideon named Yahweh Shalom, was narrowly considered to symbolize victory and peace in the world to come. However, if we look at the meaning of Yahweh Shalom in a broader sense, it will be said that it symbolizes the ultimate peace with God and the restoration of the broken relationship with God in all future history. This peaceful relationship with God inevitably led to a battle with idols that God hates. On the same night that he built the altar of Yahweh Shalom, Gideon destroyed the altar of Baal his father had, cut down the Asherah, and built an altar for burnt offering from the cut Asherah wood. On the same night that the altar was on fire, another name for Gideon, Yerubbaal, was thus given. After Gideon built an altar to Yahweh and destroyed the altars of Baal and Asherah, the Spirit of God came upon him. The Hebrew word for came upon is lavashi, which is one of the later forms of expression. The basic meaning of lavashi is to put on. To put on. To say that the Spirit came on to Gideon means that he was clothed with Spirit. That is, the Spirit of God enveloped him. From this time on, Gideon, who received the Spirit of God, shows the form of military leader. The Spirit of Yahweh present in Gideon forms the transition from a cowardly and hesitant man to a wise and brave warrior. Gideon immediately called together the tribe of Manasseh and other tribes adjoining the valley of Israel. Before going to battle, Gideon twice asked God to confirm his mission. As Gideon requested, God sent dew on the fleece once, and on the ground around the fleece on the other time. Depending on the interpretation, it can be said that he's still showing a timid side, or it can be seen that it shows the image of a delicate spiritual leader who completely depends on God. 32,000 people gathered around Gideon. However, God reduced the number of Gideon's army while still not knowing how many enemies were there. 22,000 men who were not prepared for war and trembling in fear were sent back, and only 10,000 were left. God went one step further, and finally Gideon's last remaining army was reduced to 300 men. Israel should not have even thought that they could win this war on their own strength. Moreover, the 300 soldiers who remained until the end were not those whose military abilities were verified, but merely those who reached the water by grabbing with their hands. More than 90% of the troops were lost. It was a fight that seemed impossible even with 4 people alone, but now it has become a battle that has to deal with 450 people. 450 people. Moreover, the soldiers of Gideon who remained until the end were not even properly trained. Bolling says their voluntary response symbolizes God's recognition of his judges, but it doesn't matter who they were. As with many words in the Bible, the author of Judges says that God reduces the number of Israel's army to prevent price. If Israel had won this war with 30,000 soldiers, they would have risked their lives to defeat the enemy 4 times more with strategy and bravery. However, if they win with 300 soldiers, they will never find the cause of their victory in the strategy of number of men. It would be said God fought. In fact, they didn't even go to war with weapons. Trumpets and jazz for waking up the sleeping enemy, and torches for walking through the night were all they had. Of course, they must have brought up their own weapons, although there was no regular army in Israel, and they were suddenly summoned. They would not have gone out without weapons to use in warfare. But they did go out with those weapons. They pointed to the trumpet and empty jars and torches, calling them the sword of God and the sword of Gideon. The battle ended in a great victory with Gideon. The Midianites, who arose suddenly at the sounds of the trumpet and the sounds of the jar breaking, were captured by the fear God had created, and they fought among themselves and fled like a swarm of the locusts that devour and devastate Israel's granary. The Bedouin people fought among themselves and were defeated without ever having a proper strategy. In the Old Testament, the greatest victory of this day has long been entrenched in the memory of the people of Israel under the name of the Day of Midian. The messenger of God who first came to Gideon called Gideon Gibbor-hai to Gideon, who was threshing in a wine press that was less conspicuous to avoid Midianites. Gibor High sounds like a mockery. However, great warrior was not a title given because he was showing his valor then. It can be said that it was an expression of God's will, that God would be with Gideon and will make him a great warrior in the future. However, unexpected difficulties came to Gideon, who had achieved a great victory. It was a conflict with their brother tribe, the Abrahamites. The Abrahamites resented Gideon for not calling them when the war against Midianites began. In the Old Testament, the name Abraham was used as the name of a person, tribe, or nation. Abraham, one of Joseph's two sons, was one of the 12 tribes of Israel. Later, after Solomon's death, the kingdom was divided into two, and the northern 10 tribes of Israel were called Abraham. Joshua, the hero of the conquest of Canaan, was also from the tribe of Abraham. The people of Abraham have been arguing that Gideon did not call them to war. From the standpoint of Gideon, who had already become a war hero comparable to Joshua, their claim would have been absurd. But his modesty shone. He said that the last grape that he had picked up from the middle of the hill country of Ephraim were better than the firstborn grape of Abiezer. The last grape of Ephraim, it refers to the last grape picked up from among the grapes harvested in the hill country of Ephraim. Since the quality is poor, there is nothing to make except extract jam. Abiezer was Gideon's hometown. The first grapes refers to Gideon himself. Gideon suppressed his emotions. It was not because of their fear that Gideon did not fight the Abrahamites. Why did he take such a low stance to convince them? Because they were not enemies. This was because they too were co-workers who labored and sweated together and participated in the war. Because he knew that the battle with Midian was not over yet, and that peace had not been established in the Israeli community. He suppressed his emotions and sought shalom in the Israeli community. The altar of Yahweh Shalom he built led to life in community, and the peace he had built in the relationship with God extended to his relationship with people. The Israelites again did evil in the sight of the Lord. The evil they did was to serve the idols of Canaan. The idols that existed in Canaan appears as a whole, those were Baal, Astarte, and gods from Syria, Sidon, Moab, Ammon, and Philistia. The Israelites worshipped idols, attacked by the Philistines in the west and oppressed by the Ammonites in the east. As always, this time the people of Israel cried out to God and expected God's salvation. But God was angry and turned away from the cry of the people for their salvation. An interesting expression appears. God said, "I will never save you again." And the people clinged to rescue us today. Today can be translated to as just once. And Israel's supplication worked again this time. God had turned from wrath to sorrow. God's salvation for Israel unfolded through Jephthah. The story of Judge Jephthah was similar to that of Gideon in that he was introduced as a great warrior, and that the conflict with the tribe of Abraham was reproduced at the end of the story. However, it is filled with unique events that were not found in the stories of other judges, and events that cannot be understood by common ethics and common sense. In the story of Jephthah, the great warrior, the son of a prostitute, the minister, and the head are in exquisite contrast. First of all, Jephthah was the son of an unnamed prostitute. In the Old Testament times, prostitutes were classified as a profession detestable to God. This may be the reason why Jephthah's mother's name was not mentioned. After the death of her father Gilead's wife and Jephthah's half-brothers greed for the inheritance that would be given to her, drove Jephthah out of her household and tribe. After being driven out, Jephthah lived in the grasslands of Tob with his followers. Around this time, the Ammonites had crossed the Jordan River to attack Israel. It was at this time that Jephthah again met the Gileadites, whom he had driven out. At this time, Jephthah, like former Abimelech and later David, formed his followers into a mercenary army and formed a force. The Gileadites, unable to defeat the Ammonites on their own, asked Jephthah to lead them in the fight against Ammon. The position that the Gileadites initially offered to Jephthah was a military leader. But through Jephthah, he was also promised a ruler. Jacobson argues that because of these characteristics, Jephthah's story alludes to primitive democracy. The scene where Jephthah was recognized as ruler is significant in two ways. First, as we will see later, unlike Abimelech, who previously tried to ascend to the throne on his own and failed, he was approved by the people. Second, it is that God is standing as a witness between Jephthah and the people. It can be said that this was a preview of the beginning of the monarchy that will unfold in the future. Jephthah was a negotiating master rare in the Old Testament. He persuaded the elders of Gilead who had come to make him his head and made him minister. He even negotiated with the king of Ammon before going into battle. He already recognized as the ruler of the people, sent messengers to the king of Ammon. His first words were, "What have you to do with me that you have come to attack my land?" My land is not something that anyone can say. It was a declaration made proudly by the king of one country to the king of another. king of Ammon also responded by saying that the land occupied by Israel was my land. From this point on, Jephthah's foolish quarrels and negotiations began. Here is a summary of Jephthah's argument. First, from the beginning, Israel did not occupy the land of the Ammonites. When the Israelites entered the land of Canaan, they passed through the wilderness and went around the land of Edom and Moab. The God of Israel delivered Sihon and his people and struck them down and took them in, so it has nothing to do with the land of the Ammonites. Second, each nation lives in the land given to them by their gods, just as Ammonites occupied the land given to them by their gods Chemosh. So the Israelites were living by occupying this land according to the will of the Lord. Third, Israel has occupied the present land for the past 300 years, so the right to occupy the land has always been with Israel from a long time ago. If this land was the land of the Ammonites, it means that the Ammonites would have returned to it earlier. Therefore, if Ammon would attack Israel, it would be doing evil, and if there would be a war, it would be for the Lord to judge. The king of Ammon did not accept Jephthah's argument, and the war broke out. It was at this point that the Spirit of God came upon Jephthah. Jephthah, who received the Spirit of God, did something that was difficult to understand. He also tried to negotiate with God. He vowed that if he returned victorious from the war, he would sacrifice the first person to receive him as a burnt offering to the Lord. When he returned victorious from the battle with Ammon, an unexpected problem arose. In the Old Testament times, there was a tradition that when men went to war and returned victorious, the remaining women went out to meet them. The first to meet Jephthah was his only daughter. Jephthah tore his clothes and said, "I have opened my mouth to the Lord, and I cannot turn back." And Jephthah's daughter comforted her by saying, according to the word of her father's mouth, to me. 2 months later, he kept his vow and offering his own daughter as a burnt offering to the Lord. It is argued that the human sacrifice ritual was always widespread in the land of Canaan, may have been hidden behind the incident of Jephthah's daughter's sacrifice, and is also interpreted as an absolute obedience instance that is in line with Abraham's obedience instance. But is it enough to interpret this event as a model of obedience? Jephthah's vow was clearly a mistake. Jephthah's oath and burnt offering reflect Israel's lack of understanding and experience with the covenant God of Israel. In the end, Jephthah followed the custom of Ammonites of offering children as burnt offerings because of his vows. Then he could not be said to have won the battle with Ammon. Even if the person who received Jephthah was someone other than his only daughter, he should not be a burnt offering. Human sacrifices were not pleasing to God, and they were only pagan sacrifices that had to be eliminated. It was God's test to ask Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, but Jephthah's case was different. It was the result of bargaining from not believing in God completely, and it was a tragedy created by greed to rise above the people ahead. His vow was just a false prayer. If it was wrong, it had to be corrected, even if it is a vow made before God. If it is something that cannot be afforded, it is appropriate to review the situation of the person who made a wrong vow. Problems with the Abramites also appeared in the case of Jephthah. When Jephthah returned victorious from the battle, the Abramites again complained. The point of the complaint was that he did not call them when the war broke out. When Gideon defeated the Amalekites, the Abramites had complained. At that time, Gideon calmed them down, saying, "Is it not the last grave of Abraham better than the first one of Abiezer?" But now the complaints of Abramites were more of a threat. "We will surely burn you and your house with fire." Jephthah's response was also different. Unable to quench his anger, he chose to fight against Abraham. He chose to fight, partly because the Abrahamites despised the people of Gilead and called them those who fled from Abraham. Jephthah's cruelty reached its climax at the Jordan Ferry. He had each fleeing across the river pronounced a shibboleth when the people of Abraham, who could not pronounce she, pronounced shibboleth as sibboleth. They were mercilessly killed. That day, the Jordan River ferry had no choice but to be stained red with the blood of its people. Gideon wisely overcame the conflict of tribe of Abraham, so that there was no conflict between the tribes. However, Jephthah follows the principle of retaliation and caused great loss of life to the tribe of Abraham. Also, unlike Gideon, Jephthah did not fully understand that the battle with Ammon was Yahweh's war. Jephthah's vows for victory reflect his lack of realization that Yahweh is a mighty God in war. As a son of a time who served all the gods of the surrounding nations, the author of Judges does not say that a person with the Spirit of God is a good leader. Jephthah was born as the son of a prostitute and was a successful leader in his position, and there is no doubt that he was chosen by the people and by God. In the Old Testament, similar names appear in the two books of the period of the Judges. Judges, and Ruth, respectively, Abimelech and Elimelech. These names are kind of theophoric name. A theophoric name is one in which God is included in the meaning of the name. Abimelech wanted to become king himself, so he gathered Gideon's sons, 70 of his brothers, on one rock and killed them. Jotham, the youngest son of Gideon, who was the only survivor from the slaughter of his brothers, sarcastically told the people of Israel that they had set up a king they did not need through the famous fable of the trees. Just as the thorn tree in Jotham's fable threatened that the fire would come out of him and devour the cedars of Lebanon if he did not treat him as king. In fact, Abimelech burned the people in the tower of Shechem to death. The narrative of Abimelech and the fables of Jotham are the product of fragmentary stories with a political background rather than material of a heroic and religious type. The name Elimelech of Ruth is mentioned only in the Amarna texts of the 14th century BC, but not elsewhere in the Old Testament. This name can be understood as a name that reflects anti-monarchy thinking, in contrast to the story of Abimelech, who died miserably in the book of Judges. The author of the book of Ruth, through the name Elimelech, rather than a historical figure, suggests, like any other theophoric name, the God who is the object of Israel's faith. After all, it is no coincidence that such a name appears. It is implying that the era of the judges will soon end and a monarchy will be established in Israel. In particular, Jotham's parable emphasizes that Melech, the king, is an unnecessary existence in the Israeli community. So, was there really no king in Israel during the period of Judges? Not like that. The God of Israel was ruling as the king of Israel even in the days of the Judges. The Israelites had already recognized God as their king from all ages. The phrase "there was no king in the period of the Judges" reflects the foreshadowing of the rise of the monarchy. It is also subtly understood as the failure of the government based on the Torah and the disregard for the God of the Torah, the true king of Israel. The Israelites escaped from the Egyptian tyranny. Pharaoh defeated the feudal lords of Canaan and eventually established a kingless kingdom. And the author of the book of Judges, who experienced a tragic monarchy, was expressing that Yahweh has been ruling Israel as an invisible heavenly king even in the days of the Judges. The book of Judges shows that God's faithful grace continued in the darkness conditions of an era without a king, and told the leaders what leadership was needed in the future monarchy. The narratives of Gideon and Jephthah in Judges show the model of leadership needed for Israel in a kingless era in both positive and negative ways. The Deuteronomistic historians promise is that if Israel obeys God and keeps His commandments, God will be with them and give them victory. The author of Judges, who experienced the division and destruction of the monarchy caused by the kings, told the story of the judges and what leadership Israel needs. The Israeli leaders were externally charismatic leaders who protect Israel from war, but internally they were leaders who healed division and solidified the unity of the nation through forgiveness and harmony. And above all else, he was saying that the true leader of Israel is God. In the time of Judges, Israel simply did not have an earthly king as visible as Gentile nations. The invisible God was an omnipotent heavenly king who could not be compared with any other king in the world. Thank you.